Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Red Tinted Glasses podcast. If you're looking for positivity, this might not be the place to come on the back of yet another 2-0 defeat for the Dons. It's no points, no goals, but lots to discuss, Phil, on this upcoming episode, isn't there?
Yeah, I think there's plenty to talk about. Was hoping I'd be making my return under more positive circumstances, but yeah, hey ho, it's been a bit of a turgid start to the season for the Dons so far.
It really has, and you've dragged yourself out of your sick bed for this episode in particular. And we're mixing things up a little bit on the podcast this week because some of the feedback around episodes is on the back of the defeat. Folk tend not to listen, so we're breaking it up and we're doing a sole focus on the weekend's defeat here on this episode. And later on the week, probably around Thursday, we will have a preview of the Morton game specifically. So keep the content and try and build something up towards that as well. But Phil, I don't know about you with your journey up the road, if there was any sort of positivity coming up on the bus, but I've got to give a shout out to Archie, who was down with his mum and dad from Shetland, joined us in McCammons beforehand, and big fan of the show, so that's why he's getting the shout out. But he wasn't so positive in terms of the scores. I think I was the only one that maybe predicted a draw. But what was the level of positivity amongst you lot coming up the road?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was some positivity, I suppose, against Fourth Reds. I don't think there was ever any real weight behind the hope at times, but we run a predictor on the bus, and there was quite a lot of draws. The odd 1-0 win, which I think I backed myself with a Yangi first goal scorer. Less said the better. No, I think there was a little bit of positivity that we maybe could come away with something. The team line out then came out just before we got into Aberdeen, and maybe the positivity maybe slightly started to dwindle, perhaps.
Yeah, let's talk about that team news. Biggest surprise, I guess, is Matt Knusters missing out on the team altogether. Being told it's a soft tissue injury picked up in training on the Friday, which is likely to see him miss the cup game this weekend. I think the biggest thing from the team news, aside from Matt's missing out, was Jimmy's persistence to stick with a back four. That was a surprise, as was the midfield too. That really stuck out because it felt like there wasn't going to be much pace in that midfield.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was unfortunate that Knister missed out, and whether it was potentially that sort of stubborn aspect of Jimmy that we've discussed before, or whether the Knister injury really sort of scuppered his plans. I know coming up the road, I was kind of thinking a back five perhaps, and then the back four then is what starts on the field with Gavin Malloy as our only recognised defender on the bench. So I wonder if that injury did kind of maybe put a spanner in the works for how Jimmy did want to line up. But yeah, I think for me it was the midfield too that kind of I pinpointed off the bat. Maybe not so much Graham Shinney, but more so Sievert Nielsen. I think after his display on Monday night, I was kind of confused to see him getting in the nod. We know how quick that Celtic midfield likes to move the ball about, and that tends to be Nielsen's kryptonite, especially as the game goes on and tiredness kicks in, and you're thinking this is just going to become a hack and slash fest for him. So yeah, a bit of a strange one. I think that was sort of the point where the sort of scraps of positivity I had kind of faded away.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you highlight that maybe Jimmy did want to go to a back three, and that injury to Knusters changes his mindset or opportunity to do that. I think it was Keith pointed out that Malloy was maybe our only recognised left footer on the bench, as well as a result of that injury. I had no issue with Devlin coming into the team. At fullback, I think there was indications that was going to be the case anyway. Not just from that midweek game against Fraserburgh, but in general with Shinnie struggling at left back against Hearts, but he has struggled in there, and Jimmy's preferred to play him in midfield against Celtic. I'm in total agreement. Based off that performance on Monday night, I can't believe Nielsen regained his place in midfield. We saw last season that combination of Shinnie and Nielsen didn't work in terms of driving us forward in the midfield. Palaversa was starting every pre-season game up to the Ipswich game. Actually, no, he started the Ipswich game, yet hasn't started a league game. Leighton Clarkson, I was admittedly surprised. Again, I could see the counter argument for the physicality element, but he started the cup final, so I don't get that midfield. We've seen it before with previous managers, not just at Aberdeen, but across the league. Could favouritism to certain players come back to cost Jimmy Tleen?
I think potentially, yeah. I think we said before that sort of almost stubborn nature, and that favouritist aspect is probably the one gripe that I think a lot of people, can quite rightly, I think, throw his way. But yeah, like you say, that midfield too, last season didn't really show signs, especially as that run came to an end, of really working. I did kind of pose that question to Vitamin T on Twitter earlier on today, so I'll be interested to see if he comes back. Just sort of asking the sort of how Shinnie's stats vary depending on what midfielder he's next to. But yeah, it's a bit like you. I thought it was going to be a sort of almost a copy of that cup final team that we saw come out. Palaversa and Shinnie in the midfield. Obviously, maybe with Adil in the 10, and that sort of front three that started anyway, of Tope, Yengi, and Milanovic. So, yeah, a bit of a strange one. I thought that midfield pivot, and like you say, I do understand that counter argument of physicality, but I thought, outside of maybe the first half hour, we were quite a soft touch at times. So I think even then, the physicality aspect kind of went out the window early doors.
Yeah, it's all right and well putting both of them in the midfield if you're going to be physical, but as Colin said when he came on here, too many times, especially at Pittodrie, we show Celtic far too much respect. And I agree, aside from the first 20 minutes, we suddenly backed off Celtic and allowed them to dominate possession, the ball, and it was all too easy once again. As frustration kind of rang round Pittodrie, we'll maybe come to that specifically a little bit later on. But I also want to speak about, because I think, it could be interesting, coming towards the weekend and the next few games. There's been some criticism of Alexander Jensen based on the weekend and also his performance at Tynecastle as well. I'm really baffled by this criticism that Alexander Jensen seems to be getting over the first two games.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite obvious the defensive aspect of his game isn't his strongest suit. I mean, by no means is he a bad defender, but he is more of a modern fullback that likes to get forward. But yeah, it was a bit like yourself. I was kind of confused seeing some of that. Okay, maybe he had one or two moments where he was caught out of position. Sorry, in Maeda got in behind, but outside of that, I thought he did quite a good job at keeping Maeda quiet. Outside of those, sort of two off the top of my head, two times he's been sort of caught out. And like I say, I think he was one of the few that were really trying to get on the ball and get us forward a little bit. I thought at times, like you say, we were a bit negative and showing Celtic too much respect and playing backwards a lot of the time. And I think Jensen was trying to get us into the final third and try and pick out those channel balls into Tope and Milanovic. So yeah, I think some of the criticism thrown his way was a bit unjust.
Yeah, kind of feels a bit out of the blue as well. I mean, you point there, Maeda got in behind. I know Mitov pulls off a couple of good saves from him in the second half, but quality aside, again, in the final third, you just need to look at the second Celtic goal from Rio Hatate to really epitomise the quality that Celtic team possesses. But aside from those moments, did we really play that badly as much as maybe some of the overreaction is alluding to? Because the game for large spells followed a similar pattern to the cup final. The biggest difference was Celtic got that second goal at probably the killer moment when Jimmy would have been preparing to change things to pull the tide back in our favour.
Yeah, I don't think we played badly. I think there were aspects that were poor. Like I said, I think a lot of the basics for me were missing. I think as well, he's we'll come and speak about him later, but Yengi didn't really give us much in terms of relieving that pressure at times. But then neither did Keskin and Milanovic on the odd occasion as well. I think we really did struggle to really keep our composure when we did get into the final third, and just immediately put us back under pressure. But I think there were signs there, like you say, that first 25 minutes, I thought the press looked good. I thought we looked quite organised and quite solid at the back. So I don't think really it was as bad as it sort of feels in the aftermath.
And, I think it just feels bad because we're sitting here with no points on the board. We've not scored any goals yet. But, I mean, how many people expected us to have points on the board at this stage? I'd like to know, because our record at Tynecastle is terrible and our record at home to Celtic is also terrible. So it was very much in the realms of possibility that we were going to be in this position. Maybe what is dragging the feeling down further is the fact that we've not scored, and I'm not going to say we're struggling to score, but it's not as fluid in the front three as we've seen certainly this stage last season.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. I think it was a tough start to be given in the league. Hearts away, Celtic at home, and then potentially before it got cancelled, Dundee United away as well. It was going to be three sticky games to start off a season with, and I think compounded with the fact that we had that sort of lackluster pre-season. The win against Cove maybe wasn't as commanding as people expected it to be. The loss against Fulham and the loss against Ipswich is maybe kind of compounding it, along with obviously the frustration over signings. It feels like there's that lack of signings. Obviously, there's a few injured, but I think it all kind of compounds into the overarching frustration to the product on the pitch. Like I say, I think admittedly against Hearts and against Celtic, we could have been better. Arguably, maybe should have been. But much like you say, I don't think anyone would have said we should have had 6 from 6 out of these opening 2 games. And we're 2 games in, it's still a long way to go. I did see a stat that said, what was it, this time last year, Hearts had failed to win 2 games. Aberdeen had won their 2 games. It's that sort of roles reversed, and you can sort of see how a season can change. So, yeah, I think people need to try and keep the head a little bit. I mean, by no means am I saying people don't have the right to complain, because they do. I'm one of them at times, but I do think there has to be that element of sort of trying to look at it from both sides.
Yeah, and I think also a big remembering the fact that we're only 2 games into the season. We'll kind of come on to that towards the end of the episode, when we try and flip the negativity into some form of positivity before we return to league action against Falkirk at the end of the month. But again, certainly looking ahead to this weekend and also that Falkirk game as well, one thing we'll want to see from both games is a little bit more. I'm not saying more from the front 3-4, because again, I was really impressed by Adil Oshish this weekend. I think seeing him in the flesh compared to watching on TV gives you a totally different perspective. Because I know in my reaction to the defeat at Tynecastle, I said I wasn't really sure what he did. But again, in person, and he has the only shot on target from the game. I'm just glad Kasper Schmeichel saved it, because had it gone in, it would have 100% been ruled out for one of the most blatant handballs that John Beaton's surprisingly not seen. But again, across the first 2 games, it's that lack of testing the goalkeeper that is probably the biggest frustration, not only for fans, but I'm sure Jimmy Tilleen as well.
Yeah, it's that final third product's a bit concerning. We just seem to not have that confidence in us to be able to pull the trigger. We seem to kind of, like I've said already, lose that composure when we get in around the box. And I think it was a stark contrast to Celtic. Obviously, their first goal, we somehow let Liam Scales maraud up the pitch and play a ball out wide. And I think that's the difference. Their centre halves can, come up and play around our box, and our front 3, front 4 just seem to sort of lose it a bit whenever we get around the Celtic box. But no, I think you're right to point out Adil Oshish's game. I thought he played really well. For me, I think the most impressive thing was his willingness to press and get stuck in, because when he first came in, I thought, oh, this could be, a very luxury player. He's not going to want to do the dirty work. If things aren't going his way, it'll be arms up in the air. But even at 2-0 down, flying into challenges, having a wee barmy with, I think it was Alistair Johnson at one point. So I was really impressed with him and just the quality he brings. But like I said, I think the players around him, I think, need to kind of step up in that quality and confidence level, because there was a number of times he would get the ball on the turn and he would just be looking into blank space. His head would be up, but there'd be nothing around him. And, I think once that starts to click, we'll maybe see that, like you said, free-flowing kind of attack that we're kind of expecting.
Yeah, and I suppose, that's again coming back to what we've had for a pre-season versus what the teams playing in the League Cup group stages have had, is they've had more games to get things to click, to form the partnerships. And I think Jimmy's alluded to that we're nearly there, not quite there, but it's coming. Unfortunately, when it's not coming and we're losing, it's going to be panic stations. I don't want to use that word because I don't think we're quite there yet. And I will ask you if you think we're there yet a little bit later. So you've got some time to think of your answer on that. But again, in terms of this fixture, no win at home against Celtic in 9 years. Fraser Wall said to me as well, 25 years with no clean sheet at home to Celtic, which is just unbelievably crazy if that is actually true, because I haven't gone and fact checked it. But that first goal did feel oh so simple. I briefly watched it back before we recorded the episode tonight, and I know Chris Boyd was slamming Nielsen's role in it in terms of allowing Nygren to run into the box and him be more distracted by Ida, who's already covered. You've highlighted the Liam Scales marauding run as well. Everything with that goal, it is just such a classic Celtic goal against Aberdeen. Simple, and we don't make them work for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could just pick, any fullback or winger in any centre forward or midfielder from Celtic over the last 10 years and insert their names in, and you could probably find a similar goal. The ball gets shifted out wide, gets drilled across the box, and nobody reacts to it really, apart from a Celtic player, and it's a goal. And it happens so often. And like I say, up to that point, we were organised, we were switched on. I thought we were doing quite a good job at sort of nullifying the threats that Celtic had. And like we said, it's just that one moment where there is that lack of concentration, it comes back to bite you. I think Celtic were in the same boat as us. I don't think they've, necessarily had the best preparation for the season. They were looking tired, but at the same time, it never really felt like they got out of second gear for the most part, which I think is the frustrating thing from an Aberdeen perspective, is like you say, it was just far too easy of a goal to concede.
And I think that's the biggest thing as well, is for as much as, Celtic won the game 2-0, they didn't have to work for that 2-0 victory. You're absolutely right to highlight that, they haven't got out of second gear. And if probably we applied some pressure, they would have quite easily gone through the gears and really put the foot to the floor. Whereas I felt we were doing all we could, and it wasn't coming off at all. We've got to speak about Kusini Yangi. I mean, you could probably do a whole episode on Kusini Yangi, but I don't really want to lead a pile on Yangi, but he's not helping himself right now. I'll just ask you what you thought of his performance.
Yeah, it wasn't good, to put it lightly. I do feel sorry for him in a way. I'm going to be the devil's advocate here, because I know that other people on social media, other media personalities, not that we are, but radio, etc., will probably have the prongs out for Ksini Yengi. But I just genuinely don't think he's been signed to be that starting striker. Yes, I know he got the number 9 jersey, and people will look into that as being, that he's a starting striker, and that's what he was signed to do. But I genuinely don't think he was. I think when you look at his time at Portsmouth, majority of his, the season that he did score a lot in League One, a lot of his appearances were off the bench. I think his game, or not his game, I think the way that he's being implemented is maybe not necessarily his game. I know at Hearts, I thought he looked a lot better when he was sitting on the shoulder of the defender and getting him behind, as opposed to actually trying to be that out ball. And I think he suffered from the same thing against Celtic, where he was, kind of forced into being that out ball, and it wasn't quite working for him. And I don't think that's the way he's meant to play. And you can just tell he's someone that's devoid of confidence just now. I mean, the moment that stood out for me was, I think he won a flick on from a header, which most centre forwards would be expected to do in that scenario. And Nicky Devlin was right up and applauding him and giving him a pat on the back. And you can just tell it's someone that I think is struggling a little bit just now. I don't think it is helped. By no means did he have a good game. He was honking, right? He was honking. But I don't think the reaction of a lot of the fan base is really going to help. I know that people are calling out for a new striker, and we want that sort of, I guess, more finished product that's maybe going to be a bit more of a talisman in front of goal. But at the moment, we don't have that. And I think jumping on his back and celebrating his substitutions, not quite the way to go. We saw the way it affected the likes of Shayden Morris first time around. Pape Gay as well. A lot of Kuseni Yengi reminds me of Pape Gay. I think once that first goal comes, we might see a totally different player. When that first goal is going to come, I have no bloody idea at the moment. But yeah, I feel like a lot of the criticism isn't unjust, but I do feel like he's maybe being scapegoated a little bit. Like I say, I don't think by any means he was the only issue we had on the park on Sunday. And I think as well, for a bit of context, there were two number 9s on that pitch. One cost 9 million and was equally as hopeless for the most part. So really, it could be a lot worse, I suppose.
Yeah, and I'm glad you highlighted Ida, because I know Celtic fans have their concerns around Adam Ida, but obviously we're operating in two different markets. I think he was just as poor. The only problem is, because Yengi had that terrible game on Monday in terms of the chances missed, everything he's doing is getting highlighted even more. I think scapegoat is a perfect word to use. He is the scapegoat right now. Jensen's being pulled in as second somehow. But I also think it's through no fault of his own. We have to look at the recruitment team. People are going to blame the recruitment team for the signing of Yengi, absolutely, let alone giving him a 3-year deal. But also this whole nature of why we'd started the competitive action with one striker, Sokler maybe not fit, Ambrose, who knows what the future holds for him. A striker who's devoid of minutes, goals from last season, needs that confidence. He's obviously lacking it in his own game, let alone with the crowd getting on his back as much as they did at the weekend. But he's extremely frustrating to watch. You highlighted the way that the teams reacted to some of his hold-up play. But I mean, the effort to try and drill the cross back across the 6-yard box, where the more I watch that, I think he's trying to stop the ball to then use his left foot. No idea why, but that sums up the start to his Aberdeen career. There was another instance as well where he is running through on goal, has Keskinen and Milanovic either side, and just seems to awkwardly run into the Celtic defender on the ground and just kills that counter-attack. I know you highlighted in our group chat, both yourself and Callum, the shot that was blocked by Topi. Obviously, being in the red shed, I had no idea that even occurred. I thought I'd won too many Disaronno Iron Brews yesterday, that I was going absolutely crazy and didn't recall that. But again, you could see Topi's frustrations. There's little things that's building up from a fan point of view. But you mentioned about the crowd reaction, because again, Keith was showing me some stuff from his group chat where one member had said, again, 1-0 down at half time, similar vibes to the cup final. But what on earth are the crowd doing, chanting Esther Sokler as soon as Yengi has a horrible touch? I think great throwback to Shayden Morris, Phil. he's going to feel so small, despite being a giant himself. He desperately needs a goal, and questions are going to be, I guess, asked depending on if the work visa goes through for Lazetic. Does Yengi then start against Morton? Because that's turning into a big game.
Yeah, Morton is turning into a very big game, and I think, like you say, it puts everybody in a tough position. It puts Yengi in a tough position. If he drops another stinker, by God, everyone's going to be buying for blood. It puts Jimmy in a tough position. In terms of man management, does he give Lazetic that opportunity to get in and get him up and running? Does he try and get Yengi that little bit of confidence? Does he put Sockler in, to try and look at him as that option, as the striker until Lazetic is potentially up to match fitness and sharpness? So it throws up a lot of interesting questions, but yeah, I think, rightly or wrongly, Yengi's been the one that's being highlighted, and I know that goals are a focal point for a team, and he doesn't quite look like the man that's going to provide them at the moment, but I feel Monday night and Sunday, he wasn't the only issue on the park. And I think, it is just being highlighted because of his Monday night performance more than anything. But, I do think he has a benefit to the team. I thought defensively at set pieces, we looked a bit better, having a little bit more of that physical presence there.
And
like
really
I say,
what you want from your striker, though, to be beneficial.
No, it's not. But then it poses that question again of he seems to, either whether that's his choice or how he's being coached, to drop so much deeper. And you just think, if he's in between the posts, is that maybe just where he has to be? He doesn't have to touch the ball. He doesn't have to be relied on for dribbling past players and running into men that are lying down. He just sits in the box, and if it comes his way, he pokes it home. It's a tough one. And like I say, I think it's not going to do any good jumping on his back immediately. But that's just me. Even if he is shite, give it a tiny bit longer.
It's easy to say, but I mean, I'm not going to say I didn't jump on his back at the weekend, because he was just so frustrating. And again, listening to the Sports Sound podcast and seeing Willie Miller's comments around his lack of effort or lack of emotion, Willie Miller highlighting the fact that it doesn't look like he even cares, which I know a lot of fans will pick up on very quickly, but it was the effort that was frustrating me most, regardless of if his touch is shite, he's kicking the ball out for a goal kick when he should be getting the ball across to whoever's waiting in the box. It was, you could see Milanovic, Keskinen really bursting a gut to keep that press high. And when the ball went across to Schmeichel, just Yengi's just jogging. There was no determination from him to add to the press either. And for me, that was the biggest frustration, that if you're going to play shite, at least show you care, like put in that effort.
Yeah, no, and I think that is justified. Like I say, I don't think any of the criticism is unjust. Do you know what I mean? He's not covering himself in glory. It's not like he's getting 5 chances a game and he's just really unlucky when it comes to keepers are making great saves or he's hitting the post or whatever. He is playing poor, like that. There is no two ways about it. He is not playing very well. But like I say, I just think from that mental aspect, it's whether that's going to change if he does get that little bit of confidence. A lot of the same criticisms were labelled to Pape. He looked lazy. He didn't look like he was going to break into a full sprint. And then as soon as the goals started coming, it was like a man possessed. And I hope it's going to be that same sort of story. Whether it will be, I'm not a clairvoyant. I've got no idea. He might just be lazy and uninterested, but occasionally score a goal. But yeah, I'm hoping, if he is to start against Morton, maybe that'll be the sort of moment that maybe kicks on his career.
I think it also has to be highlighted that the Pape resurgence came after a loan spell. Question then, does he start against Morton this weekend? Lazetic signing or not?
I think so. I think Jimmy will stick with him. And I think it is purely from that man management aspect. It's sort of, if he takes him out against Morton, does that then kind of signal the end for him, really? There's word of Aberdeen looking at 2 strikers.
Which I don't blame them.
No, I do not at all. Because I also I'm not too sure whether Sockler's the answer either.
And I think you have to highlight the fact that, for as much as the crowd called for Esther Sockler, he didn't do. I'm not saying he was worse, but he wasn't significantly better than what Yengi was offering us.
No, and again, I think that just comes down to the nature of the game. Again, he was
Yeah.
tried to be used to give us that out ball, and it's really tough to do when you're against the likes of Carter Vickers and Scales, who are quite good in the air, respectively. So, yeah, if two strikers are coming in, you're then looking at Yengi, Lazatic, another striker, Peter Ambrose still at the club, Fletcher Boyd being used as a striker occasionally by Jimmy as well. You're seeing a lot of options there. So does bringing in a couple extra options then sort of signal the end for Yengi in a way? Only 2 games in, so I think Jimmy's kind of got to make that call of almost putting his arm around him and saying, I back you to do well, prove it to everybody else that you'll do well in a way. So I think it'll be interesting to see whether it's, like I say, because I have no idea what sort of point Lazatic is at in terms of his fitness and his sort of match readiness. So whether it would be, in my opinion, Yengi or Sockler more than Yengi or Lazatic.
Yeah, and on Lazatic as well, as I said, obviously talks progressing, looks to be set up in just a visa to maybe iron out before we see the scarf above the head photo. What is it about Lazatic that is devoiding him of the same level of criticism that Yengi got when he signed? Both have similarly poor goal scoring records over the last couple of seasons. Yet Lazatic is almost being hailed as a hero. Do you think this is down to Yengi's performance, the fact that he's played for AC Milan or been signed by AC Milan and been on their books for a few years? But you can see both ways why, yes, the fans are excited to get another striker in that could be the difference, but also those that are saying his record's not that great. What is there to be excited about?
Yeah, I think people quite rightly point towards his goal scoring record. Considering that he is being lauded as this messiah that's going to somehow fix any of the issues we've currently got going on, which I think, again, is kind of a lot of pressure to put on him off the bat. But I think you're right in saying there's not really too much of a difference when looking at them on paper. Is it because Lazatic is coming from the European market, where he's played at AC Milan, he's played at Belgrade, he's had those sort of experiences, whereas Yengi's been, West Sydney and Portsmouth, the two clubs of note, Adelaide United as well. I think, I think that's maybe the difference is the sort of pedigree that he's potentially coming from. But again,
it's as well for Yengi, having that previous partnership with Milanovic, that might click into gear again, but obviously right now there's not the signs of that. And I do wonder, with the postponement of the Dundee United game, I know obviously that playoff game is going to carry a lot of importance, but there's an opportunity certainly after the Morton game to do a lot of work on the training ground. Yes, you've got the European ties, but in between them, without that game, get back on the training ground and try and work on something that will improve us domestically, because we know that playoff's going to take care of itself one way or another, but people will be concerned about the start domestically.
Yeah, and again, I think for me, it comes back to our preparation. I don't think we prepared at all well enough for the season compared to other teams around us. And I think the lack of League Cup group stage and early European qualifiers have kind of bit us. So I don't know whether, there is going to be that opportunity for a slight bounce match, perhaps, to just try and get those extra sort of minutes into the legs. But it's a tough one. I mean, I think, again, like I said, Yengi's never quite been the prolific goal scorer either. I think, like I say, I go back to that season at Portsmouth where I said he's used off the bench. I think he only scored, 14 that season? And I think in the league that was only 7 or 8 goals, I think, off of, 9 starts out of 26 games or something. So, again, it's sort of, I don't think he is going to be, or is meant to be, that starting striker. Whether Lazatic is, I've got no idea. But I think our problems go bigger than that at the moment. And again, I think for me, it comes back to that preparation. I think we just look second to a lot of things, and we just don't quite look like we're at that level that we were come the start of last season, where we did have those League Cup games to, like you say, prepare, get the new signings clicking, get that system clicking. And I think it has really, in a way, we've almost been punished for finishing top 6 last season and getting, the playoff game in Europe.
We've actually been punished for winning the Scottish Cup, and I saw someone put it on Twitter last week that I wonder if winning the Scottish Cup actually took the club by surprise, that we didn't have a pre-season plan for winning the Scottish Cup. It was maybe in place for not, and who knows? I'm sure Stephen Gunnar, Alan Burrows could answer that question. But speaking of benches, again, the bench gave us an impact. Leighton Clarkson and Dante Polvara, again, 2 players that kind of stood out off the bench. Fletcher himself did all right. But a lot, again, being made around the impact that Dante Polvara has, and Jimmy Tilleen's comments post-match around him not quite being ready for the intensity of starting games yet, based on kind of last season. He's trying to manage his minutes. But again, for me, on this sort of debate, I'd rather see the players starting games, providing that intensity, and then going to somebody else in the latter stages, than bringing these players on that look lively, give us an impact, but we're already 2-0 down by that point.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting comment as well, considering he believes that Nilsson's up to, the intensity of a match after his injury, because evidence would suggest that he's nowhere near ready for the intensity.
Might need his eye surgery redone, given some of the level of his passing.
Exactly. So yeah, it's a tough one. I know they're trying to protect Dante, and sort of manage his minutes back in. I mean, it was a major injury that he got. And there'd be nothing worse than him coming back and immediately either having the same sort of injury or aggravating, something more minor in the same area. So it's an interesting one. But even outside of that, I mean, like you've already mentioned, Palaversa not in the starting 11, Clarkson not in the starting 11. Just a strange one for me. Polvara's one that,
weird one.
Yeah, Palaversa is the really weird one because, like we say, if we were looking to kind of emulate the performance of the Scottish Cup, Palaversa was so integral to that in the midfield, that not including him felt kind of strange. He is that, I feel like he offers that kind of combination that we need in the midfield. He has that bit of bite about him, but is also just such a technically gifted football player. That he seems like the no-brainer for that sort of game. I know that people can maybe have that sort of criticism of Clarkson in the likes of a Celtic game where he's maybe too technical but not gritty enough in the midfield. But I think Palaversa gives us a bit of both there. But yeah, I was having an interesting conversation about Polvara today, and it's been a few managers now that have came in and not quite trusted him to be the starter midfielder, and whether his role maybe lies more as a squad man. And I think it's a tough one because I don't think we've seen enough of him starting to really make that judgment. I thought when he got given the number 8 shirt upon Barron leaving, that was kind of the sort of sign for me that maybe he was going to get that opportunity. And obviously the injury, I don't think, helped him getting that shot. But he is someone that I would like to see more of this year. With 1 year left on his deal, the big fear for me is that we lose him for nothing. Even if we do decide that his role is as that squad man, if we can get him signed up for a couple of years, I'm sure there's somebody in the MLS that would take a sizable punt on him. So even from that perspective, just trying to, ensure that he stays for another couple of seasons, I think for me is important. But I would like to see him get involved because in the cameos that we see of him, we always seem to improve when he comes off the bench. He always seems to give us that little bit of drive, and I think he definitely did that on Sunday. And maybe unlucky not to find the net sort of late on.
Just probably summed up our day. How things weren't falling for us. One quick question before we kind of try and end the episode with some form of positivity or level-headedness, as much as we've tried to keep this. I was listening to the Sports Sound podcast this morning, and Brendan Rodgers being asked about incomings, and he wouldn't put a number on it, wouldn't be pressed on it. Do you think the fact that Jimmy Tilleen has said he's looking to bring in 4 players puts a little bit of pressure on recruitment, Stephen Gunn, the board, because fans are now, again, given our start, expecting 4 players?
I think so. I think we kind of spoke about it in regards to the Hearts game as well, that, was bringing Fletcher Boyd on before Esther Sockler as the centre forward. Maybe Jimmy tried to send a little bit of a message to the board saying, you need to give me something here. So maybe Jimmy is trying to put that marker down. I'd be interested to know where we sort of are in terms of that structure, because I know obviously we're meant to have that director of football role, that head of recruitment role, also now getting that pathways manager or whatever fancy title they're going to get. How involved is Jimmy in the recruitment just now, or is it really all being delegated behind the scenes and it's now starting to get a little bit frustrating for him that he's maybe not getting the options that he's wanting? Obviously, we're never going to know how that's going to work, but I do think it puts a little bit of pressure on the board. I think a lot of what we see on social media, what we've been hearing in the stands, is probably putting pressure on them as well. Potentially what we're seeing on the pitch is putting a little bit of pressure on them as well. We can say all we want and try and keep level headed, but at the end of the day, it's a results driven business. We can try and, like I say, I can try and play devil's advocate as much as I can, but until Yengi starts scoring and we start winning games, people aren't going to be in a good mood. And I think that's just kind of long and short of it. And we've still got plenty of time left to make those moves. It's maybe, like you said earlier, the criticism being, why weren't they in the door maybe slightly earlier and getting involved in that preparation?
Yeah. So Aberdeen rooted to the bottom of the table, as I'm sure plenty of people are already ready to point out to ourselves. We've got no league game now for 3 weeks. We return to action on the 31st of August at home to Falkirk, where we will still be bottom going into that game. We're the only team in the league without any points. We're also obviously scored no goals as well. By the end of September, as yet, we don't have a rearranged date for that Dundee United game. We're only set to have played 5 league games, so a lot of talk is kind of on how Aberdeen are going to fall behind the 8 ball in terms of the jumbled start. You've got the international break after the Falkirk game coming up as well. How important... Well, actually, I'll ask you that afterwards. Is it too early to hit the panic button based on these first 2 games, given we've still also got 3 weeks of the transfer window left as well?
I think it is too early to be panicking. We see it time and time again in leagues all over the world. Teams maybe don't get off to the best start and completely turn it around. I mean, as much as I was waiting to say, as much as it pains me to say it, you just need to look at Hibs last season. They were really under it, and potentially David Gray was looking at his job being down the pan. And the way they managed to turn it around, and the performances even they're putting in, so far this season, in Europe particularly, I don't think it's time to panic yet. I think Jimmy's shown that he can get something out of this team. He can get something going. So hopefully he's able to do that again. I think, like you say, there's still 3 weeks in the window to go. That's maybe the only place where the panic button might be getting hit, which is maybe better or worse. I know that we've been trying to be a lot more deliberate in how we do our transfer business as of late, and it's all about getting the right man for the right cost, etc. But as time goes on, maybe the odd panic and throwing an extra few quid at somebody just to get them in the door might be better for the likes of us. So we don't feel like we're super devoid of any options. But yeah, I think as a whole, it's maybe a bit too early to be worrying.
I suppose the only thing as well that's going to come back to bite Stephen Gunn at this current stage was the interview that he did in Portugal, where he stated that we would be better prepared for European group stage football. Now, I know obviously that group stage football is going to come post-transfer window, so we do have to reserve judgment for 3 weeks' time. However, it does feel that there is going to be some judgment based on how prepared we are for the playoff, given the draw and how favourable it seems, given the frantic nature of the first leg. Folk will see this as an absolute ideal opportunity to get into that Europa League groups. league stage, I should say now. So it will be disappointing if we haven't fully prepared, given the club said they would be covered for that. What I was wanting to ask you though is, given the next two games coming up in the league are Falkirk and Livingston both at home, is 6 points a minimum?
I think it's got to be. I think it really has to be. You're looking at the two new teams coming up. You would like to think, at home, we can hopefully give them a bit of a doing, perhaps. Falkirk's style of play maybe lends slightly more to that. Admittedly, I've been very impressed with Falkirk, and I think they will surprise a lot of people in the league this season. But with them playing that sort of almost free-flowing, playing out from the back, high-press football, it might lend itself a little bit more to how Jimmy wants to play and catch them out. Livingston are always just a bit of a pain in the backside. So it depends on what Livingston shows up, whether it's the one that, is going to hold on for the 90 minutes or the one that's going to let the floodgates open once one goes in. It'll be interesting, but I think definitely should be looking at 6 points for those to really get us going.
Well, the thing is, if we get 6 points from that, are we in a bad place? There is panic right now, but for a bit of realism, if you'd like, only 4 teams have won a game so far in the league. I know we're only 2 games in, but that's it, Phil. We're only 2 games in. There's a long way to go. Another thing, as I said to Keith in the pub afterwards, the next league games, you're looking right now at Falkirk not playing next time out, St Mirren not playing next time out. These are all teams we can leapfrog with a win, obviously playing Falkirk. Rangers not playing next time out as well. They've got the small matter of a derby to play and don't look that great. I'm sure their fans are panicking much more than we are, and they've got points on the board. So there's teams that we can jump ahead next time we're in action. And as I said, we're 2 games in. After 4 games we're still on 0 points, or I think not on 6, folk will begin to really crank up the questions and potentially pressure on the manager as well.
Yeah, and I think that would probably be justified. If we are sitting after 4 games and only on, maybe 3 points, I think people would be quite right to sort of pose those questions. But like you say, it's a long season. Going by heart, social media, they've won the league already on the 11th of August. So, leagues aren't won or lost at this point. There's still plenty of football to be played. There's still plenty of incomings to come in. There's still plenty of time for Jimmy to maybe stop being so stubborn at times. And there's still plenty of time for Kasuniengi to grab a single goal and make me happy.
Yeah, there's lots that can happen. There's lots that's going to be covered on this podcast. So make sure you subscribe, follow us wherever to hopefully jump on the positivity bandwagon when it's back. But our season hasn't yet taken off, but I'll be taking off on the Runway Run in 2 weeks. The sponsorship link is in the description. And thank you to those of you from the podcast that tune in. I know Noel over in Florida, Alan and Chris over the other side of the world, Australia and New Zealand respectively, have donated. So I appreciate all the donations that have come in from those of you that support the channel. If you want to spur me on a little bit, the link's in the donation. We're only £200 away actually, Phil, from as a podcast being able to have handed over £1,000 to Lifestars for the year. And given we've still got a good 4 months of the year left, I think it's a phenomenal job, and obviously a big thank you goes to all of you who both watch and listen to the podcast that support us, giving back to a charity as well. So on that positive note, I think it's a perfect place to end it, because at least there's something positive happening off the pitch, and let's hope the next time we reconvene there's positivity on the pitch. I'll be back on Thursday with the next episode, previewing the Morton game. So until then, we will see you then.